dia ikut topik so janganlah cari tajuk personal relief dekat tajuk lain pula. So saya susun ikut topik. For example, non-business income, kita punya apa lagi kita dah buat sebelum ni all the employment income, all the recordings tu memang saya share under each material topic tu. So once you go in one particular topic, you memang boleh nampak lah. All the notes, the examples, the video recordings tu kat dalam tu. I think I started to share dari mana employment income tak ada rasanya sebab employment income kita buat face to face hari tu kan. Alright, so I think we can start 8:08 already. Good morning. Selamat pagi semua. How are you today? Sihat semua hari ni? Alright. Good. Okay, before I start saya just nak share with all of you yang I think by now semua dah tahu kan yang our VC dah announce that dia kata untuk UPSI tak ada peperiksaan akhir. Okay, I just don't want you to misinterpret the information and I think by now you all pun dah dapat info from all your lecturers but regarding our subject, so just want to share with you untuk peperiksaan akhir kita dia actually bukan tak ada dia gantikan. So like for our paper, our assessment is 50% coursework and 50% final exam. Okay, so which means in our paper we have the final exam component. Alright, and the university allow papers or subjects yang ada final exam component ni untuk gantikan the online exam tu menjadi salah satu dari 3 options. Satu, it would be a take home exam. Second, it would be dia panggil tugasan khas. And yang ketiga, dia panggil sebagai projek khas. So nanti for this semester, you all akan jumpa maybe, kalau bukan 3-3, maybe 2 of the assessment types lah. Right? And then the choice is given to the lecturer based on the subjects level lah. Kalau paper yang low level, boleh buat exam, the take home exam tu. And you will need from 5 to 10 hours untuk jawab soalan exam tu. Jawab and then submit. Untuk kertas, untuk tugasan khas or projek khas tu, dia ialah something about write up lah, sama juga but the time given is longer. Especially for higher level paper kalau tengok paper-paper yang final semester tu most of them akan pilih the project khas tu because BHA Badan Haluan Akademik dah bagi kita guidelines those 3 sahaja yang dia allow untuk buat sebagai pentaksiran akhir. So bukan kita tak ada pentaksiran akhir we still have that component of final exam tu. It's just that we have to change the format lah. So in our case, I was thinking, saya sebenarnya memang nak buat yang exam tu so that would be a take home exam lah. It's just that exam tu kita tak buat macam kita buat midterm tu kita buat midterm tu dia online kan, so semua orang kena buat within that particular time and submit within that time. But untuk take home for the final ni, dia bukan macam tu you will be given more time. And I will let you know if I can choose the exam format otherwise the exam tu kita akan label dia sebagai tugasan khas and you have longer time to submit. Saya tak suka sebenarnya, I still prefer the exam tapi dari university decide tak boleh untuk buat the online exam tu, so kita follow je lah. Anyway, as you all know for accounting papers, kita memang terikat dengan ACCA and also MIA and whatever we decide, whatever we prepare for the final assessment ni, kita kena report dekat ACCA and also MIA. So that is why I am inclined towards buat exam but si university dah cakap macam tu and I think most of our papers pun nanti kalau you all tengok akan buat the take home exam Right. So untuk mengelakkan kekeliruan yang kata tak ada final exam apa semua tu, no. the terms tu je yang ditukar, memang tak ada final exam. But for papers yang memang dalam komponen tak ada komponen final exam, dia memang tak ada lah. But for our paper, memang ada komponen final exam. So the final exam will be named as probably take home exam. So what I can say is that for this semester, ialah cara you belajar pun lain, and then the assessment pun will be different. And I think logically, kalau tengok daripada sini, all of you, if not most of you, all of you will get good grades lah if you perform or if you complete all the assessment. Okay, any question tak on the final assessment tu? Saya tak nak ada, because now macam-macam the fahaman tu kan, because memang ada lecturer yang dah share kata no final exam. Because the timing pun dia bagi kita minggu final exam tu, it is up to the lecturer sebenarnya untuk set. So in my case, saya prefer the first week of the final exam tu. So please block your calendar. Date saya tak decide lagi, but kita belum tengok lagi the full calendar untuk final exam tu, the final exam period tu bulan Ogos nanti. But please be prepared untuk awal-awal lah. I will give the question dia, kalau ikut format dia, the soalan will be given on the first day of final exam tu. And kena submit based on the SLT kalau paper yang let's say buat take home exam, so maximum would be 10 hours kot, I think 10. Tapi tak ada dah sampai 10 hours kan, I think, I don't know, belum plan lagi maybe 5 or 6 hours lah for the take home exam tu. Alright, so if you have no question, tak ada soalan boleh faham semua just to clarify with you lah, dengan pula lepas ni macam, alamak paper tu ada, paper ni tak ada Alright, so if you have no question, tak ada soalan faham semua? Alright. Okay, so for today, we are going to learn a new topic. Okay, I have shared with you. Saya kena kecilkan macam ni lah because I cannot see your chat nanti. You all ada notes ni kan? So I hope you don't mind saya share the screen besar ni je. You all boleh nampak kan? Alright, so that I can check your chat from time to time. Okay, so for, tak apalah, pakai dulu lah. So for today, we are going to look at capital allowance. So this capital allowance ni, what we can say is that this is only for a business. So what we have done so far is for individual, right? So kita dah buat employment income, kita buat non-business income. And the non-business income pun kita ada section 4B until 4F, all the rental income, royalty income semua tu. And then after the personal or the individual tax tu, kita proceed dengan personal relief and rebates. Also personal. So for today's lecture, it will be on capital allowances, which is for only for business, not for individual. So what I can show you here is that under capital allowance, again, I have to show you the format of tax computation. Alright, so what we have here is we have done section 4B until 4F. So these are the non-business income. So for capital allowance, dia akan jadi expenses, but dia akan include, kita akan include dia under business income. So it will be under section 4A, but capital allowance dia bukan section 4A lah. 4A ni kita akan buat bila kita buat business income nanti. So the capital allowance ni akan duduk kat dalam ni. Before we arrive at our statutory income for business, kita akan kira capital allowance. So ini tak ada apalah this one yang kita dah buat on personal relief tu. But for business so you have to remember the relief ni hanya untuk individual, not for business untuk personal je, bukan untuk business. So apa yang kita buat business income ni, let's say that particular individual, we are still looking at individual so jangan confuse kata kita tengah buat company punya tax, tak. You will be dealing with corporate tax dalam taxation 2 nanti. So for taxation 1 ni, dia masih lagi individual, tapi in this case individual yang ada business, so proprietor. Okay, individu yang ada business, so kita kena asingkan the business income dia and also the non-business income. Then we will arrive at chargeable income. Okay, but if we're doing business income just for business, chargeable income for business is the total income. Business tak ada relief. Okay, and if you have the textbook, please baca lah, because based on our calculations, sebab ada yang tanya saya apa beza adjusted income, apa beza aggregate income. So those are actually, kalau kita tengok kita akan start dengan total income. Gross income. So setiap satu ni, we're looking at one person. Contohnya myself, let's say saya ada business, at the same time saya kerja, I have dividend interest, I have rental income, I have royalties and also others. So untuk setiap satu section ni, whenever we compute the types of income, it will be a gross income. Okay, gross income from employment, gross income from dividend interest. Alright, for rental ni kita start dengan gross income juga, but untuk rental kita ada allowable expenses kan, kita tolak all the repair and maintenance tu. So untuk rental dia akan ada adjusted income. So whenever you have the deductions or you have the allowable expenses tu, bila kita tolak je, gross income dah jadi adjusted income. So tak semua item dekat sini ada adjusted income. Bila dia ada adjustment sahaja, it will be adjusted income. Otherwise dia akan jadi gross income. Let's say untuk seorang person, dia akan ada gross income from employment, dividend interest, gross income from rental or adjusted income from rental, and also royalties and others kalau dia ada. So bila dia dah dapat adjusted income, gross income untuk setiap satu ni, kita akan totalkan. Bila kita totalkan tu lah nama dia dah jadi aggregate income. No, you aggregate different types of income tu, you tambahkan, aggregate is total lah. You totalkan all the gross income, you will get aggregate income. Which means employment plus dividend interest, rental, royalties ni, kita akan dapat satu amount and that will be aggregate income. Sinilah. Okay. So just ignore the business income ni dulu. So untuk individual, kita buat hari tu, lepas the aggregate income, kalau dia ada banyak jenis income, we will minus the donations, then only kita dapat total income. Total income tolak dengan relief, kita akan dapat chargeable income. Okay, so I hope you understand the different meanings of setiap ni. So setiap satu ni saya tak letak lah. So setiap satu ni the total dia akan jadi gross income. Okay. This is important because now we are dealing with capital allowance. So you should know capital allowance nanti tempat dia dekat mana. So capital allowance tempat dia dekat sini nanti. Okay. Alright. So boleh differentiate between the different types of income tu. Okay. This is for a business. Saya asingkan dekat sini. So for a business ni, let's say ni business A ni business 1. Kita letak star sikit. In arriving at statutory income ni, this is the format dia. So kita start dengan aggregate income tadi. Let's say satu orang ni dia ada banyak different types of income. So kita dah totalkan all the employment, royalties semua tu. Dia dapat aggregate income and then let's say dia salah pula. Kita dah ada adjusted income, okay. And then adjusted income from the business lah. And then kita akan add the balancing chart. Ini kita akan tengok later. So this is how you arrive at the statutory income from business. Kat sini salah tempat. Okay, we come back to this later. Alright, so for these capital allowances, saya divide into two parts. So we are going to do part 1 today. Part 2 will be dealing with next week. Right, so for part 1 ni, under capital allowance, this is the general or this is the explanation of what is capital allowances. To make it easier for you, capital allowance is a concept in taxation which is equivalent to depreciation in accounting. Okay, nama dia je lain, dia ialah depreciation. But the calculation and the format and the rates is different. So for depreciation, we will follow the accounting standards, our PPE, property, plant and equipment standard. Dalam tu ada how to calculate depreciation. And the percentage or the useful life is actually depending on the industry and also depending on the business kan. So I hope you all can still remember when we calculate the depreciation, we actually depends on the usage of the assets. And company A and company B, even though we are looking at the same assets, the usage might not be the same. But for capital allowance, dia sama. Right? We will look at that later. But for capital allowance ni, what I want to show you is that one, it is a concept of depreciation. Two, it is only applicable to business activity and not for individual. Let's say I don't have any business, I purchase a car and I want to claim capital allowance. Cannot. I must have or I must run a business in order for me to claim for capital allowance. Alright, so the purpose is to give a relief for wear and tear of fixed assets for business. Alright, that is why the concept, this is a depreciation punya concept. And examples of assets normally used in business are motor vehicles, machines, office equipment, furniture, all property and equipment, property, plant and equipment that we are dealing with in financial accounting. Alright, so in order to qualify, the expenditure must be capital in nature and used for business. So it is mentioned here that the claims for capital allowance can be made in the relevant column provided in the tax return form, so we can claim. When we claim the capital allowance, it will actually reduce our business income, which will eventually reduce our tax payable. The capital allowance is actually to reduce the business income. Just like we calculate depreciation in our profit, in our income statement, we have gross profit and we minus depreciation expenses that will eventually reduce our profit. Alright, conditions for claiming capital allowances are, these are very important. You must operate a business. Tak ada business, you cannot claim for capital allowance. You must purchase a business assets. Assets are being used in the business and you are actually the owner of the assets. Alright, there are two types of capital allowances. One is called initial allowance, another one is called annual allowance. So this is different from depreciation. Depreciation kita tak ada annual ke initial ke. It's just an annual depreciation. The initial allowance tak ada. But untuk capital allowance kita ada. Alright, so for capital allowance, the initial allowance and the annual allowance, the rate is different. So the initial allowance, the rate is fixed at 20% regardless of the assets and what type of assets or what is the cost of the assets. So the initial allowance is given when you actually first purchase the asset and the first year we purchase the asset. Annual allowance ni, ini macam depreciation. Flat rate given every year based on the original cost of the asset. So annual allowance is given for each year until the capital expenditure has been fully written off unless the fixed asset is sold, scrapped or disposed. Right, in which case a balancing allowance or balancing charge will be calculated. Right, I have to relate this to our financial accounting because here, like I said, the capital allowance is similar to depreciation concept. And whenever you sell the asset, we have a balancing allowance and also balancing charge. The balancing allowance and balancing charge is equivalent to gain or loss on disposal of asset. Right, when you sell, you will have a gain or a loss. But in income tax, it is not called gain or loss on disposal. It is called balancing allowance or balancing charge. Okay, that is why taxation and accounting is two different areas. So for financial accounting, kita kira ikut financial accounting, kita ikut accounting standards. For taxation, we still have the net profit. Kalau you tengok nanti later on bila kita buat business income ni, we still have the net profit. We still have the tax payable. But the computation is different. Kita ada satu what we call a tax computation and kita ada satu kita kata sebagai financial statement. Financial statement prepared based on accounting standards. But tax computation is prepared based on Income Tax Act. So we will have two different profit sometimes. Dalam financial statement kita profitnya lain, but in our tax computation, the business income-nya different figure. So we have to do the adjustment nanti, but not on this subject lah. Later on, I'm not sure you all deal with deferred tax to bila. That is why we have what we call a deferred tax. Itu because of the difference in these two computation. Okay. These are the rates. So like I said, for the initial allowance, the rate is fixed, 20%, regardless of the asset. So the type of asset according to the Act, they classify as heavy machinery or motor vehicle, 20% initial allowance, plant and machinery 20%, IT equipment 20, and also others 20. So initial allowance ni, if you can see here, the rate is the same. Okay, but it is not for annual allowance. So heavy machinery is defined here as bulldozers, crane, ditches, excavators, banyak lah. So you can look at the definition here. The motor vehicles, all types of motorized vehicles, motorcycle, aeroplane, ship, plant and machinery, general plant and machinery not included under heavy machinery. So selain dari heavy machinery, ni masuk dalam plant and machinery. And we can also have others such, for example, office equipment, furniture, and also fittings. Right? The annual allowance is different. Ini je yang fixed. So this one different. So you have to sort of memorize lah. For example, motor vehicle 20, plant and machinery 14, computer equipment 40, and others 10%. Any question tak so far? Do you have any question? Before we move on to the computation. Boleh Alright, okay. Okay kan, because the concept is just like depreciation. Later on you tengok kita akan compute pun dia macam depreciation so nothing new actually. Cuma adalah new sikit because here kita ada higher purchase Alright. Types of, okay. Dia macam ni because I always relate to financial accounting because semua orang dah buat financial accounting 1 and also financial accounting 2. Some of you dah buat financial accounting 2. Apa yang kita nak calculate in capital allowance ni the terms tu actually the concept tu sama but the terms tu lain For example kalau accounting kita kata depreciation, so in taxation dia dah jadi capital allowance. And in accounting bila whenever we purchase PPE kita akan ada initial cost, kita tambah installation cost apa semua tu kan, so I hope you can still remember. And kita akan dapat initial cost untuk the asset tu. Okay. But in taxation dia guna term qualifying expenditure. So saya dah tulis dekat sini, it is actually the initial cost. Harga yang kita beli. Harga asset yang kita beli tu. So that will be qualifying expenditure. This qualifying expenditure will be used in computing our capital allowance. Just like PPE, when you purchase PPE, kita ada initial cost, the total cost of PPE tu, and we will use that cost to compute our depreciation. Same goes to taxation computation. We will have what they call a qualifying expenditure, and kita akan compute the capital allowance based on this qualifying expenditure. Alright. So there are actually 6 types of capital allowances given under the relevant schedules. If we look at this part, we have qualifying expenditure on plant and machinery, qualifying expenditure on industrial buildings, qualifying expenditure for mining, prospecting expenditure, agriculture expenditure, and also forest expenditure. But the focus of this chapter is on these 2. 4 ni kita akan tengok juga, but in general sahaja. The focus, the computation would be on these 2. That is why I separated into 2 parts. So for this week, we are dealing with qualifying expenditure on plant and machinery. That would be our part 1. And next week, we will be doing qualifying expenditure on industrial buildings. Right? Dia beza sikit in accounting, our property, plant and equipment termasuk building. Kan? But for taxation tak. Building diasingkan. They have what they call an industrial buildings. Okay, next one. So we can look at the definition of plant and machinery. Ini pun saya tak plan nak go into details lah. You can hear, you can read what is plant and machinery, and then persons eligible for capital allowance. This is important because, like I said, capital allowance are available to any business if the following 4 conditions are met. You must meet these 4 conditions. Salah satu tak boleh, mesti semua. The capital expenditure must have been incurred in providing the plant and machinery, which means you paid for that assets. And the person incurring the capital expenditure must be carrying on a business. Like I said, I cannot purchase motor vehicles or machinery and I want to claim capital allowance because I don't have any business. So tak boleh. C, the person must be the owner of the asset at the end of the basis period. And D, the machinery or plant must be in use for the purpose of the claimant's business. Okay, so ada 4 condition dekat sini. Mesti incur the expenditure, orang yang incur tu mesti ada business, orang tu mesti owner, and the assets tu must be used in the purpose or in the claimant's business. Alright, this is how we compute the qualifying expenditure because we can also have expenditure incurred on the installation of machinery. So this is normal when you purchase plant or machinery. Some company, they have to incur the installation cost, alteration of an existing building or structure to install the plant and machinery. This is similar to financial accounting whereby when you first purchase an asset, we can include the installation cost. So remember ada a few dalam ni yang ambil FA2 dengan saya last semester kan. So kita ada dalam tu installation cost lah, kita ada professional fees lah. So all those dalam financial accounting tu akan masuk dalam ni. But untuk qualifying expenditure for taxation ni installation je. Yang lain-lain tu tak. So you can see from here even the cost of the asset pun from taxation perspective and accounting perspective is different. Dia tak sama pun. Orang ni record cost different numbers and for taxation dia akan record cost different numbers based on the standards, based on the act. So untuk financial accounting kita ada accounting standards, untuk taxation kita guna income tax act. Tak sama Alright. Ini qualifying, sekali lagi kita tengok the calculation dia. So just to show you that the installation pun can be incurred as can be included as expenditure. Okay. Under paragraph 21B, there is a 10% rule. Ini pun dalam accounting tak ada. Dalam tax dia ada. Schedule 3, paragraph 21B. It's about, again, about qualifying expenditure. Alright, so saya letak QE je. QE is qualifying expenditure. So whenever I use CA, CA is for capital allowance. And later on, kita akan jumpa RE pula, residual expenditure. Banyak huruf-hurufnya. Alright, so for QE ni, it includes expenditure incurred on preparing, cutting, tunneling or levelling land to prepare a site for the installation of plant or machinery. So this is what we all already know. Alright, the installation cost ni. But where such installation expenditure exceed 10% of the aggregate of the aggregate of the cost of the installation and the cost of the plant, such expenditure will not qualify as QE. Okay, what does it mean? I have the example here. Right, tengok example ni dulu. So this TM Sendirian Berhad, financial year end June 2019. So the company has 2 machines, printing machine and also cutting machine. So the printing machine, the cost is 280,000. The cost of alteration to the existing building for the installation of the machine, 33,600, and incidental cost of installation 2,400. And we have another machine, the cutting machine. Capital expenditure incurred on the cost of the machine, 62,000, and cost of preparing the site for the installation is 8,000. Alright, in this case, we cannot simply total up. Walaupun dekat atas tadi, it is mentioned that installation cost can be included, but the 10% rule apply. Okay, so let's look at the first one. So the printing machine cost dia tadi 280,000. The cost of alteration to the building 33,600. We also have incidental cost of installation 2,400. So in this case we can total. I'll come back to this later. Kenapa yang ni kita boleh totalkan? So you total the cost, the alteration and also the cost of installation. It will give us a qualifying expenditure of 316,000. Simple kan yang ni? You just tambah je. Alright, but let's look at the cutting machine. Okay. if we go back to the example, the cost of the machine is 62,000. The cost of site installation is 8,000. So the aggregate or the total expenditure is 70,000. But you must remember, we have the 10% rule. Tambahkan dulu, multiply with 10%, cari satu number. But here we get 7,000. The 10% rule ni, this is how we calculate the 10% rule. Alright. So you tambah semua, multiply by 10%. You have to compare the 10% ni dengan the installation. Now the 10% is actually less than the installation kan. In this case, kita tak boleh ambil pun the cost of installation ni. Kita hanya boleh ambil cost of machine. Boleh faham tak? Tengok balik yang ni. Right, so this is how we compute the 10%. For this one, if you times 10%, yang ni tadi saya tak tunjuk 10%. If we times 10%, kita akan dapat 31,600, betul? So 31,600 ni kita compare dengan installation ni 2004. So tak ada masalah, dia less. Dia less. So that is why kita boleh ambil terus semua ni, but not for this one. This one dia dah terlebih dah. Patutnya installation boleh jadi 7,000 je. Now installation dah jadi 8,000. Bila dah macam ni kita tak langsung tak boleh. You do not get confused because before this I know bila kita buat relief je kita kata oh the maximum is let's say 7,000, so kita akan tukar kat sini jadi 7,000 kan. No. This is not the case for qualifying expenditure. Once you exceed the 10% rule, langsung tak boleh pakai dah figure dia. No more. Sebab tu the QE for cutting machine is only 62,000. Okay. So before you can compute the capital allowance, we have to calculate the qualifying expenditure dulu, like this one. So kena pilih lah sama ada installation cost tu boleh masuk ataupun tidak. Alright, so the types of capital allowance, ini yang saya dah mention tadi dekat atas. We have initial allowance, annual allowance and also balancing allowance. Kita deal with balancing allowance later. Okay, so again sedikit explanation on the types of capital allowance ni. Initial allowance, it is given when a person first acquired plant. The first year dia beli tu. The first year dia beli dia akan dapat initial. Initial means the first time. So the first year dia beli asset tu, that person is entitled for a 20% initial allowance, flat rate, regardless of the type of the asset. Okay. Another thing is that untuk capital allowance ni kita akan dapat full year. No time apportionment is required. Let's say dia beli asset in June. Tapi kita tahu year assessment or the basis year sampai December. Alright? So let's say asset tu dengan dia 6 months je. In accounting kita kena apportion the useful lah. The depreciation kita akan ikut month kan kalau accounting, but in taxation tak. You beli asset tu 1 hari bulan 12 sekalipun, you will get full year capital allowance. No time apportionment is required. Okay. Eligibility sama macam tadi lah. The person must incur the expenditure, the asset must be used for business, the person is the owner of the asset at the end of basis period. Any questions for initial allowance ni? So don't worry, later kita akan compute. I have few examples to share with you later. Okay. So far okay? Okay. You can always say something because one thing I hate about online lecture is that it's like you're talking to yourself, because I have to read the chat kat sebelah ni kan. So if possible, you can use your mic to ask question or to answer my question. Alright, the second type of capital allowance is annual allowance. So annual allowance is given every year. We call it annual, so it is given every year. This is just like depreciation every year, as long as the asset is in use at the end of the basis period. Alright, so the rate varies according to industries and type of asset, yang macam table kita tengok tadi. Computed on a straight line basis by referring to the full amount of QE. So for example, kita dah kira dekat sini tadi. This is our QE. So the capital allowance will be computed based on this figure. Okay, and eligibility pun sama macam the first dekat atas tadi lah. The QE has been incurred, asset is owned by the taxpayer at the end of the basis period, and asset is in use in the basis period for the purpose of business. Alright, I have one example here. I want you to discuss based on the situation, state with reason whether Krishnan or Chandra can claim capital allowance of the bank. So you baca ni dulu. Alright, so what do you think? Who can claim the capital allowance, Krishnan or Chandra? You have to state reason why you said so. Tak boleh kata, oh Krishnan can claim or Chandra can claim. Dah habis baca belum? Okay, Fariza rasa Krishnan because the asset is under his name. What about the rest? What do you think? Agree, okay. Lain? Krishnan?
Hi, Doctor.
Yeah.
Doctor, I think Krishnan can claim the capital allowance because
Okay.
even Chandra paid for the van, but he registered on Krishnan's name. So I think Krishnan can claim the allowance.
Okay, thank you Ganesan lagi.
Okay.
Semua jawab Krishnan ni. Anyone yang rasa Chandra boleh claim? Semua setuju? Semua kata Krishnan boleh claim? Because nama tu nama Krishnan. Is it? Okay, lain? Tak ada, semua setuju. Semua kata Krishnan can claim. You baca balik the eligibility tu. Actually, Krishnan tak boleh claim, Chandra pun tak boleh claim. Janganlah marah ke? Yes, you have to read the eligibility. In order for a person to be eligible to claim, dua-dua pun tak boleh claim. Rugi kan? Okay, why dua-dua tak boleh claim? Right, you baca balik the scenario ni. Bagus dua beradik kan. These brothers ni, dia nak expand the business, they need a van tapi tak cukup duit. And then the brother ada business lain, beli van untuk dia. And Chandra pay for the van in cash and responsible for the maintenance tapi register atas nama Krishnan and will be used in Krishnan business. The van will not be used in Chandra's grocery business. Remember the eligibility. Kenapa saya kata Krishnan tak boleh claim? Okay, satu, all of you said that van tu atas nama Krishnan. Yes, so kita boleh kata Krishnan tu ialah legal owner lah sebab nama van tu nama dia. But dia incur expenses tak untuk beli van tu? Look at our eligibility. No. Tidak kan? That's the first thing. You mesti incur the expenditure. Sekarang tak beli dapat free kan? Yes, kena ikut semua. Betul Siti. So satu, dia kena beli van tu. Sekarang dia tak beli, brother dia bagi free. Walaupun van tu nama dia. Walaupun dia guna van tu untuk bisnes dia. So dia dah fulfill dia guna van tu untuk bisnes dia. So yes, dia ialah owner, yes. Tapi dia tak incur expenditure. So dia tak boleh claim. Rugi je abang dia bagi. Abang dia pun rugi sebab abang dia pun tak boleh claim. Sebab apa abang dia tak boleh claim? Chandra tak boleh claim walaupun Chandra tu beli event tu. Dia incur expenditure. Dia bukan legal owner sebab nama Krishna bukan nama dia. Walaupun dia beli, kalau dia beli nama dia, then kita boleh consider. Sekarang dia beli, tapi dia letak nama Krishna. And van tu, walaupun dia ada business tapi dia tak guna van tu untuk business dia. Dia mesti beli, dia lah owner, dia guna untuk business dia. Sekarang ni dia beli, dia bukan legal owner, adik dia punya nama dan dia tak guna pun untuk business dia. So now in this case, dua orang tak boleh claim. Rugi kan? Alah Haikal, contoh. This is to show you the eligibility tu. Right? Jangan ingat, oh semua ni boleh terus kira. So, first of all, we have to decide eligible ataupun tidak. Okay? So, I hope by now all of you can remember the eligibility lah. Satu, dia mesti incur. Dua, mesti dia ialah owner. Tiga, mesti dia guna asset tu for his own business. Ini beli guna duit sendiri tapi nama pun dia letak nama adik dia and then dia tak guna untuk bisnes sendiri. But if Chandra ni dia beli, dia letak nama dia, dia guna untuk bisnes grocery dia, yes Chandra can claim. Or kalau Krishnan tu sekarang ni van tu nama dia, dia guna untuk bisnes dia dan dia beli sendirilah. Dia incur baru dia boleh claim. Okay. Any question? Gelakkan diri sendiri dulu. Salah semua, bukan Krishnan. Boleh you have any question tak? The eligibility ni, ini memang kena careful with the eligibility. Kalau tak ada saya nak proceed Tak ada soalan Okay kan? So yes, kena ikut all the syarat tu. Alright, next one is the rate. Okay, rate ni tadi kita dah tengok This is the annual allowance rate. So you have to remember, initial allowance tadi berapa persen? Siapa ingat? The flat rate tadi, how many percent? The annual allowance is different ikut types of asset. The initial allowance tu, how many percent? Alright, 20 Kalau bagi duit lepas tu Krishnan beli, boleh lah. Beli nama dia dan dia guna. Alright, so the initial allowance is flat 20%. But these are the different rate of allowance of annual allowance lah for different types of asset Alright, let's look at our first example, sedap makan sendirian berhad. I have shared this example in our Google Classroom so you boleh tengok. Okay. So this is to show you the computation of capital allowance. Right, here we have principal activity of Sedap Makan Sdn Bhd is the manufacturing of instant noodles. The company closes its first set of account on 31st December 2012. The company acquired office equipment comprises of the following. Right, so dia ada telephone system and also office safe. 80,000 and 20,000, so the total would be 100,000. The acquisition date ni doesn't matter as I told you, for capital allowance kita tak ada buat time apportionment. But kalau you calculate depreciation for accounting, this is very important kan, kita nak kira berapa bulan dia guna asset tu. In this case, no need ni nak semak je. Right, so a full year capital allowance would be computed notwithstanding the ownership period is less than a year. Initial allowance would be 20% while an annual allowance is 10%. Jangan tanya saya mana dapat 10%. 10% ni dari sini. This is office equipment. Office equipment annual allowance is 10%. Right, so let's go back to this example. Okay, so qualifying expenditure is this one. 100,000 qualifying expenditure. Kita terus ambil. Why I combine? Because these two are actually office equipment. So kalau dia ada 5 jenis office equipment, kita boleh total je dapat satu qualifying expenditure. But kalau dia ada office equipment, dia ada heavy machinery, dia ada motor vehicle lah, kita kena asing lah. Kita ada 3 dan kita ada different calculation of capital allowance. Last kali baru kita total semua. Alright, but here we are dealing with only one type of asset which is office equipment. So you just take one figure, walaupun dia ada 2 asset dia adalah same category. So we have 100,000 here, right? So in year 2012, tahun yang dia beli the company is entitled to 20% of initial allowance. So 20% times 100 jadi 20. Annual allowance 10% jadi 10, right? So 20 plus 10 dapat 30. The balance would be 70. Every year, annual allowance is for every year 2013 10, 2014 10 sampailah 2019 sampai habis. So when you finish this one sudah tak ada lah. So dia boleh fully claim the initial the capital allowance until 2019. Alright, sampai dash dekat sini. Alright, ini calculation digital machine sudah boleh kira tak dia berapa tahun dia guna capital allowance dia. Dia beli 2012. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. We have 8 years here. Look at the slide. Office equipment, the number of years for full cost recovery is 8. Alright, so by right cukup tahun ke-8 tu memang dah habis lah. So this is the example yang habis So the amount of annual allowance is computed on a straight line basis, making reference to the original qualifying expenditure of 100,000. So ini soalan ni pun dah shortcut kita dah bagi qualifying expenditure macam ni je, tak ada installation whatever. No, initial allowance just initial, first year sahaja, this one. Annual allowance yang every year. Boleh? Alright, I hope all of you can follow Initial allowance just for first year je. Annual yang every year. It's a bit tricky nanti bila kita pergi dekat hire purchase dia lain sikit. Ini generally this is how you compute capital allowance. First year when the company first purchase the asset, kita akan kira initial allowance and then followed by every year annual allowance. Follow je annual allowance ni 10 kan, sama je lah sebab dia straight line so you tak payah kira dah, ambil je 10, tolak lah sampai habis. Okay? Any other question sebelum saya pergi example lagi satu? Boleh Dia simple je capital allowance ni sebenarnya. Yang building, industry building tu dia complicated sikit. Yang ni sepatutnya tak ada apa Alright. If you have no question, let's move on to other example. Okay, belum lagi example. Alright, next one. Saya nak habiskan the capital allowance untuk plant and machinery ni So, untuk dia depends lah. Ini example ni kita nak kira sampai dia habis, but depending on the question, dia minta you calculate sampai tahun bila. Let's say saya minta, okay, compute capital allowance that can be claimed for the year of assessment 2012 and 2013. Buat 2 tahun je lah. Ini, this is actually just to show you, this example ni just to show you this part. Ni yang fully claim 8 tahun ni. Dia actually not necessarily you kena kira sampai habis pun. Depending on the question asked. Kalau dia minta untuk 3 tahun, dia buat 3 tahun dah lah. Untuk 2 tahun, then 2 tahun lah. Ini dia claim sampai habis which is not necessarily the case because sometimes dah tak boleh dah, habis. Dah habis lah nak claim lagi. Sometimes sampai tahun 2014 dia jual aset tu. Ini okay, kira sampai habis kan dia tak jual-jual. Sometimes during after 2 or 3 years the asset can be sold. Bila aset tu jual, in accounting bila dia jual aset kita akan kira gain or loss on disposal kan. But here when the company sell, when the person sell the asset, kita akan kira for balancing allowance or balancing charge. Tu beza dia. Now ni senang, easy peasy kan, tolak je terus habis. Tak ada. Life is not that simple. Mesti ada jual kat tengah-tengah tu. But to answer your question, yes, 2020 dah tak boleh claim. Okay. Alright, we also have what we call an accelerated capital allowance. Kalau tadi kita kata initial allowance 20% and annual allowance based on the types of assets. But the standard the act the income tax act ni dia ada bagi certain types of industry that can claim what they call an accelerated capital allowance. Alright, for example, accelerated rates ni initial allowance 20 sama tapi annual allowance 40. Maknanya the asset tu, the value kita boleh reduce dengan lebih cepat lah. Sebab tu dia kata accelerated So for example, utility company dia boleh dapat accelerated ni. Macam TNB semua tu kan, all the asset of utility company, they can enjoy accelerated capital allowance. So if you look at kita punya KL project tu, Tun Razak Exchange tu, alright, so the Tun Razak Exchange construction tu, they can also enjoy accelerated capital allowance. Recycling company, ni semua ada dalam act and in your textbook juga boleh baca. Recycling company, agricultural sector, those are the sector yang enjoy the accelerated capital allowance. But for our purpose of calculation ni, saya ingat saya tak ada include the accelerated lah, kita kira yang biasa je. Flat rate 20% for initial allowance and annual allowance depending on the type of assets. Okay, ni semua boleh baca lah. Apa dah ni? Tak ada fosil, ini pun tak ada apa. Okay. One thing for motor vehicles. Motor vehicles, kalau kita tengok dekat sini, motor vehicles under heavy machinery kan. So the initial allowance is 20%, the annual allowance is 20%. But for motor vehicle, dia special sikit. Because why? We have two different types of motor vehicles. Satu yang license for commercial use. Contoh all the bus, lori, truck yang bawa barang-barang commercial tu. Itu kita kata the motor vehicle license for commercial use. Ada juga motor vehicles, for example dia ada business dan dia beli kereta untuk, the company ada beli kereta untuk the manager, beli untuk the director, the car. Itu bukan commercial business. Beli bagi kereta dekat general manager, beli kereta bagi dekat manager, beli kereta bagi dekat director, itu bukan commercial use. Okay. Kalau macam tu, the qualifying expenditure tu akan jadi a bit different. Alright. So here, qualifying expenditure for motor vehicles not licensed for commercial use is restricted to 50,000. Which means, ini you kena dengar betul-betul lah which means kalau satu company tu beli kereta tu digunakan oleh director dia, maknanya itu bukan untuk commercial use. Dan let's say kereta tu adalah used car. Used car dia beli pada harga 70,000 contohnya. But the qualifying expenditure for a used car yang digunakan oleh director sebab dia bukan commercial use is restricted to 50,000 regardless of the purchase price. Okay. Tapi kalau kereta tu not for commercial use, tapi kereta tu kereta baru dan harga kereta tu ialah kurang dari 150,000, the qualifying expenditure is restricted to 100,000. Boleh faham tak ni? So saya letak dekat sini the qualifying expenditure untuk motor vehicle is actually in between 50 to 100,000 regardless of the price. Cuba hadam dua ayat dua tu. And the commercial use, for example yang saya letak dekat bawah ni lah, lorry, truck, bus, minibus, tak ada restriction. Let's say dia beli lorry untuk bawa barang-barang perdagangan ni, bawa all the commercial items ni, beli lorry harga dia 150,000 and the qualifying expenditure will also be based on 150,000. Because itu ialah commercial use. But kalau beli kereta untuk manager pakai, director pakai, bukan, dia tak kira itu sebagai commercial use. Dan dia adalah restriction untuk qualifying expenditure. Boleh? Faham tak ayat tu? Tengok ni bukan boleh ni kan, tengok ni okey faham, saya bagi soalannya nanti ambil je bulat kan apa yang saya bagi tu kan. Okay, I hope you can understand for the, ini untuk motor vehicle je, heavy machinery no restriction. Office equipment whatever semua no restriction. Motor vehicle sahaja ada restriction. Yes. For 50,000 maximum tu mestilah kalau new car pun tak apa. New car tapi harga dia less than 100,000 so tak apa. So meet all the condition. Dia tak ada banyak condition. Conditionnya satu je. Guna for commercial use ataupun tidak. That's the condition. Okay. The QE depending on the commercial use or not. Depending on this one. Nanti saya tengok kalau ada soalan yang kita boleh cuba buat. Okay, contohnya sekejap saya bagi ayat kat sini. Alright, for example, if this one company dia beli kereta, purchase a new car cost 120,000. Okay, jadi saya tambah kat sini lah. Okay. So kita nampak kalau beli new car, kita boleh kata to be used in the business or we can say to be used by, because beli kereta kereta jarang is for commercial use kalau commercial use tu biasanya lori, truck, bus semualah, kereta tak Alright, in this case kereta baru dia cost 120,000. So what do you think? Dia nak claim 50 or dia nak claim restricted to 50 or restricted to 100,000? Yes, betul. Because of this sentence New car, total cost not exceeding 150,000. So sekarang kita ada keyword dekat sini new car dan costnya tak sampai 150,000. So here the QE ni restricted to RM 100,000. Maksudnya bila kita kira QE tu nanti kita akan kira initial allowance 20% times 100,000. Annual allowance. Berapa persen motor vehicle? Okay. Contohnya Terus buat soalan juga ni. Okay. Right, so kita buat satu-satu. Dia 2018. Ini tahun dia beli QE restricted to 100,000. 20% times 100. Okay. So, ini akan jadi 20. Ini pun akan jadi 20. So, kiralah sampai habis. So, kita akan dapat dekat sini, this is what we call a residual expenditure. Kalau accounting, kita kata ini sebagai net carrying amount ataupun net book value, betul? So, sama je lah. Ialah 60,000. So you kira untuk air besar. Right, so for year assessment 2019, dia hanya ada annual allowance. So ratio expenditure dia akan jadi $40,000. And so on. Boleh? Any questions? Yang saya nak tunjuk kat sini restricted. Tak boleh. Kalau second hand, dia mesti 50 je. Dia use Dia in general 50. Tapi kalau motor vehicle tu new baru kita bagi 100,000. So in general 50 je. Right? So here yang saya nak tunjuk is this part lah, restricted 100,000. So kalau dia beli kereta lain harga 70,000 tapi used car or second hand 120 tak boleh 50 je, restricted to 50 je. Boleh kalau second hand memang regardless of how much memang sampai 50,000 je. You belilah sampai 150,000 pun. Because itu consider sebagai passenger vehicle. New car 90, you use 90 lah. 100 tu is the maximum. If the car is less than 120, kita ambil je harga car tu. But here in this case harga tu 120 more than 100,000. That is why kita restrict 100,000. If the new car costing 90,000, tak kisahlah. Ambil je lah 90. No, 50 is for used car. New car, maximum 100,000. As long as it is a passenger vehicle. Ini kita kata passenger vehicle, bukan commercial. Director guna, manager guna. Okay? Any other question? Untuk this one? This is only for motor vehicles tau. Untuk heavy machinery dan lain-lain tu tak ada restriction motor vehicle sahaja. So for motor vehicle you kena tengok lah dia used ke, dia new ke. Kalau nothing mention about the new ke, kita pakai 50 lah. Restriction is for 50 Restricted doesn't mean that you have to take 100,000. Kalau harga beli tu is less than 100, then ambil je lah less than 100 tu. This is the restriction. Alright. Next, kita kena tengok hire purchase transaction. Kira lah sampai habis berapa tahun. Yep. Kalau dekat sini motor vehicle. 4 years je. Ini kalau soalan minta you compute sampai habis lah otherwise soalan akan biasa saya bagi macam ni lah you compute the capital allowance for your assessment 2018 and 2019. So kita kira lah 2018, 2019. Tak kisahlah dia akan habis bila so kalau macam ni you kena kira 2 tahun lah, tak payah kira sampai habis lah depending on the question asked. Alright. Kita ada satu lagi yang lebih kompleks So for heavy machinery, motor vehicles, it can be acquired either through cash or hire purchase transaction. Hire purchase semua tahu beli machinery or motor vehicles ni using bank loan whereby you have to pay monthly installment and biasanya harga kita beli based on hire purchase ni is higher than when you purchase for cash lah. Okay. So for hire purchase transaction, it's a bit different. I just want you to know that whatever examples yang saya go through tadi, itu assuming that dia beli for cash, bukan hire purchase. Kalau hire purchase, it will be mentioned in the question, the asset is acquired through hire purchase transaction. Okay. So, important information about hire purchase is that satu, hire purchase ni, the monthly installment tu consists of the capital payment and also hire purchase charges. And the capital allowance available is, saya letak merah dekat sini because nanti bila kita tengok example career manufacturing ni, then you will know kenapa saya merahkan dekat sini. Capital allowance calculation dia pun lain sikit. Bukan yang macam tadi kita buat very straightforward. Macam ni, this is straightforward. Kita tahu the initial allowance, kita tahu the annual allowance, kita terus kira je. This is straightforward. Sebab dia kata kat sini dia tak ada mention dia guna hire purchase, so kita terus kira macam ni. But if it is mentioned in the question that dia beli asset tu using hire purchase, the capital allowance calculated would be different. Okay. So the initial allowance on QE incurred each year of the hire purchase period and annual allowance, it's untuk hire purchase, initial allowance kita kira every year. Ni beza. Siapa tadi tanya kan, initial allowance tu 1 tahun je ke every year? Kalau beli by cash, initial allowance 1 tahun je kan claim. Kalau beli by hire purchase, initial allowance can be claimed for each year of the hire purchase period. And the annual allowance is actually computed based on the cumulative QE. Bukan macam sini. Ini annual allowance kita kira on QE je kan. 100,000 kita bawa lah 100,000 tu sampai habis. But for hire purchase tak. Our annual allowance ni, our QE will be different sebab kita akan tambah QE. Okay. Alright. Let's look at current manufacturing example. This one from your textbook. So if you have textbook, you can go to page berapa dia? (444). Okay, thank you. Right. So here, satu, look at for keywords. Current manufacturing purchase a boiler on 1st July 2018 on the following hire purchase term. Alright, nampak je hire purchase terms, your calculation would be different. Bukan macam yang tadi. So here we have cost of the asset 160,000. We have deposit paid 16,000. Sum finance 144,000 and terms of repayment 4,600 per month. Remember tadi saya kata the installment ni including principal portion and also interest portion. So dalam ni, here we have principal and also interest. Okay. So KMSB's account are closed on 31st December annually. The monthly installment commence on 1st August. Dia kata dia beli Julai, tapi the monthly installment first commence on 1st August. Okay. So kita kena cari dulu the total cost dia, the total cost of the assets. Sebab dalam ni dia bagi total cost, dia bagi deposit paid. So kita kena totalkan dulu. Right, so the total cost would be satu, the deposit payment. So dia beli, dia down payment kan, dia bayar deposit 16,000, that would be included in our calculation. And then the monthly installment, remember tadi dia kata monthly installment dia 4,600 for 36 month. Right, darab dulu, so this will give us 165,600. This is the total cost. Nampak tak? Walaupun cost dia 160 je, tapi disebabkan dia beli based on hire purchase, the cost akan jadi lebih tinggi. Okay. So the total would be 181,600. The cost of the asset without the interest portion is 160, which means the interest portion is 21,600. Alright, sampai 21,600 ni ada question tak? Sebelum kita pergi lebih jauh. I hope tak ada. So this is straightforward je. You just ambil deposit, tambah monthly installment, tolak balik dengan cost of asset to give us the higher purchase interest. Alright. So, dari sini kita tak boleh terus ambil 181,600 ni sebagai our QE. Tak boleh ambil terus sebagai qualifying expenditure because this is a higher purchase transaction. What we have to do is, kita kira balik the monthly installment 4,600 ni and we have to deduct the interest portion. Nampak tadi interest dia 21,600, loan is for 36 months, divide by 36 months, you dapat 600 per month. This is the interest portion. So, kita nak qualifying expenditure per month ni without the interest without interest. Kalau interest kita dah dapat 4,600 tapi kita tak nak. Kita nak without interest je sebagai our QE. Sampai 4,000 okay? Okay kan? Simple je, you just follow the calculation je. Alright, so you are required to compute the capital allowance in respect of the boiler for year assessment 2018 and 2019. So dia dah bagi tahu dekat sini, initial and annual allowance is 20% respectively. Alright. Kita tengok untuk 2018 dulu. So here you have to follow closely sebab dia calculation dia tak sama dengan yang tadi. Yang tadi tu very straightforward. Yang ni tak. Yang ni dia ada belok sikit. So, for year assessment 2018, tahun dia beli deposit is 60,000, monthly installment, nampak? Kita nak kira QE monthly installment tak nak masuk interest. 4,000 tadi. Bawa sini. Okay, for 5 months. 5 months, kenapa 5 months? Sebab installment dia start pada bulan Ogos. Ogos until December equivalent to 5 months. 4 times 5, 20,000. So, untuk year 2018, kita dapat QE 36,000. Nampak tak beza Kalau kita beli cash, kita tak payah kira macam ni. Kalau kita beli cash, kita terus ambil je 81,000 dia. Or kalau kita beli cash, actually kita ambil 160 ni tak ada. 160 plus 16 lah kalau kita beli cash. Tapi sekarang ni, dia beli by higher purchase So for the first year, kita dapat qualifying expenditure untuk tahun pertama. So, how to calculate the capital allowance? Sama juga. You use the rate 20%, tapi kita akan pakai 36,000 ni dari sini. Right? And the annual allowance is mentioned in the question. Annual allowance pun 20%, so 20 times 36,000. So, kita akan dapat 14,400. That will give us 21,200 balance. This is our residual expenditure. This is our RE dia punya margin dia lari sikit. RE kita ialah 21,600. Itu untuk year 2018. Nampak tak? Kita tak guna pun 100,000 lebih tu Kita kira berapa banyak dia bayar untuk tahun tu. Alright, masuk 2019, full year lah. Sebab tadi dia start in December kan. So untuk 2019, from January until December, 12 months, 4,000 times 12, that will give us 48,000. So you tambah dengan residual expenditure tahun lepas, dapatlah 69,600. So from here, kita kena kira the initial allowance and also the annual allowance, tapi kita tak boleh ambil number ni. Sebab ini dah termasuk yang tahun lepas punya Right, so for the initial allowance, 48,000 datang dari sini untuk every year Itu ayat tadi tu, initial allowance kita akan ambil ikut every year yang dia incur tu. 48,000 times 20. Beza kan, kalau tadi tu tak ada initial allowance sebab beli cash, initial allowance kat atas je. The following year dah tak ada, but for higher purchase ada. So untuk 2019 dia based on 48,000. Dia as if you beli baru every year tau. But the figure based on the installment. But for annual allowance ni panjang sikit. Annual allowance dia would be 36,000 ni. Nampak? QE yang mula-mula ni tambah dengan QE tahun kedua. So ini ialah QE 2018 plus QE 2019 dapat 84,000 ni. So 9,006 plus 16,800 dapat 26,400. You tolak, you dapat residual expenditure of 43,200. Kalau nak buat untuk 2020, kita akan buat benda yang sama. Boleh? Any question? Boleh kan? In the textbook ni dia ada, I think next week kita discuss the I think dia ada higher purchase, saya tak ingat example mana. Example 8. You can refer to example 8 of your text, page 455 tu. Itu dia ada banyak jenis aset. Dia ada heavy machinery, dia ada motor vehicle, dia ada computer, dia ada office equipment. Alright, no question untuk hire purchase ni. Alright, again I would like to remind you of your attendance. If you have no problem with your internet, which I think ramai yang memang tak ada problem, so please make sure you join the class on time. Saya tak nakkan pukul 9 baru nak join, 9.30 baru nak join, unless you dah bagi tahu saya you have some problem, so you will be in and out, tu kita faham lah. But if you join because bangun lambat lah, lupa lah, itu sepatutnya I can deduct your marks je for your attendance ni. Because we have agreed that kita akan conduct class through Google Meet ni, and I really hope that you can follow the exact times. But for this class ni, saya memang bagi, because I have some from group A yang Monday's class tu ada yang certain issue, internet tak bagus or adalah some problem, and I allow them to join this class. But we share the same link pun. But I really hope that you can follow our timetable. Bila saya kata class will start at 8 or 8:05, so please join on time. Walaupun saya tahu I have the recordings, I will share the recordings, but you have to respect the time lah. Tak boleh you join ikut suka hati you, and then later tak pula yang mana tertinggal tu nanti tengok video. Right? You should be honest to yourself as well. You should be responsible. Kelas kita, kalau kelas kita dah start after 1 hour, I don't think you akan masuk kan. But here, kalau because of the internet problem, then I understand. Tapi because of lupa, tidur apa semua tu, itu is actually unacceptable lah. Not fair to your friends juga, yang mana yang dah join since 7:30 tu. 7:30 tu tak ada lah, ada saya je 7:30 kan. Sejerit. Alright, so please take care of the attendance. So this, I know this is new norms for everyone, not only you, for myself juga. Like I said, saya tak suka because it's like I'm talking to myself je. You kena baca chat, and then sometimes you all boleh respond. So memang sangat different dengan face to face, but I hope that walaupun kita belajar macam ni, you still get all the important information, and when I share the recordings, you all boleh revisit dan tengok lah which part yang you rasa tertinggal tu. Itu advantage lah, because for face to face, once you miss the class, then you miss lah. Kita tak record tak apa kan. But here you can watch again. Okay. Anyway, kita dah tengok yang Karim tadi. So saya highlight dekat sini tadi. So if you look at the calculation tadi, for the initial allowance, this is what it meant lah. Kita tengok initial allowance on QE incurred each year. That is why untuk initial allowance kita kira untuk every year ada initial allowance. And annual allowance on cumulative QE. So annual allowance, nampak? Annual allowance kita tambahkan. Annual allowance for 2018 kita tambah dengan 2019. So and so on. Bila kita kira sampai 2020, 2021, kita akan buat benda yang sama. Kita akan kira the cumulative. Ini hanya untuk hire purchase. So you can refer to example 8 nanti. If we have time, next week saya akan tengok balik this example lah. Because next week saya plan untuk continue and buat industry building. We have ample time to finish sebenarnya. Sebab kalau tengok topik kita tak banyak and we are only in week 9. So yeah, we still have time to discuss a few questions. Dan kalau boleh nanti maybe I will supply you with other questions lah kalau ada. Alright. If you have no problem, next one slide ni. Okay, saya gantilah so slide ni saya dah tambahkan. So I'll replace with this one dekat classroom nanti. So again jangan tersalah cari, because most of the information memang saya letak dekat Google Classroom, dekat My Guru yang ada nota yang lama je. But if you need me to share the notes dalam My Guru juga, please let me know sebab as far as I know now, by now everybody memang pakai Google Classroom 100%. Sebab tu saya dah tak share our slide dekat My Guru But if you need me to share in My Guru, saya boleh buat je. I can share the slide je. But this one saya akan share dalam Google Classroom lah under capital allowance tu. Later I will share this slide and also the recordings. Okay. Alright, dah cerita karya manufacturing, baru nak masuk residual expenditure. Yang tadi saya tulis RE tadi tu. So RE is the residual expenditure. Alright, so kita dapat RE when we minus the initial allowance and also the annual allowance. Notional allowance kita tak buat takut because notional allowance ni is the allowance that could have been claimed tapi dia tak claim. So dia akan masuk dalam calculation juga. So for example, sedap makan tadi, this is the residual expenditure dia lah. This one the first kita kira QE minus capital allowance dapat residual expenditure. Sama macam dekat sini lah QE minus capital allowance dapat residual expenditure. So this is our residual expenditure. It's just like net carrying amount or net book value. Kalau in accounting kita ada cost tolak depreciation, kita akan dapat net book value. So here kita dapat residual expenditure. Okay. Next one. If I go too fast, please let me know. So kita dah tengok qualifying expenditure. We have done capital allowance, both initial and also annual allowance. Kita dah tengok juga hire purchase transaction. Kita dah tengok juga restriction untuk motor vehicles. And now sekarang ni kita kata, oh kita dah beli aset tu, kita dah guna, kita dah tolak capital allowance untuk wear and tear, and now you want to sell. Okay, dah guna after a few years you want to sell. When you dispose or discard or destroy whatever yang you buat dengan aset tu to take out the asset from your books of accounts, you will have to compute either balancing allowance or balancing charge. Saya dah tulis dekat sini, the concept is similar to gain on disposal and also loss on disposal. Okay, balancing charge ni, whenever you have sales price, kita ada selling price or sale proceed, the term sama je lah, selling price, sale proceed. When the selling price exceeds the residual value, which means kita jual harga lebih tinggi dari our residual value, you will have a gain. Sama macam accounting lah kan, kita jual harga lebih tinggi dari book value, we will have a gain. And if you sell lower than the residual value, you will have a loss on disposal. But in taxation, kita tak kata gain ataupun loss, we call it balancing charge and also balancing allowance. Jangan terbalik Balancing charge is for gain, balancing allowance is for loss. Okay, example. Ini dah cut short dah ni saya terus pergi ke residual expenditure 10,000. Let's say kita jual aset tu dengan harga 9,000. So you will incur a loss. Loss of 1,000 which is equivalent to balancing allowance. If you have the same asset with the same residual expenditure but you sell it for 18,000, you are going to have a balancing charge. The bracket 8,000 kan. Tapi saya highlight dekat sini, balancing charge is restricted to actual allowance given. For example, here your balancing charge is 8,000. Katakanlah untuk aset ni kita dah dapat capital allowance yang macam kita kira tadi tu. Let's say capital allowance kita only 7,000. So the balancing charge ni you cannot use 8,000. You have to ambil the maximum je which is 7,000. Example ada dalam buku. Alright. We have example 19 and example 20, page 483. You can refer to page 483 untuk tengok example dia. Alright, example 19 ni very good sebab example 19 ni is actually comprehensive lah. So saya boleh go through dekat sini. So those of you yang tak ada textbook, maybe you can snap a picture and share to our WhatsApp group ke. Untuk yang tak ada buku saya tak sempat nak snap ini masukkan dalam notes so maybe you can share. Alright, so what we have here in this example so please bear with me, yang mana tak ada buku tu boleh nanti later on your friend will share the picture so you can go through. Right, so example 19 ni is pharmaceuticals ni. Dia kata constructed a factory costing 100,000, sold the factory in 2019 before shifting its operation to Vietnam. So you have to compute the balancing charge oleh. Okay. Untuk 19 ni kalau tengok dia bukan plant and machinery dia ialah industrial building tapi konsep dia sama je lah. Dia beli dan dia jual. Okay. So katakanlah the qualifying expenditure dia 100,000. Dia dah calculate initial allowance and annual allowance untuk every year 2015, 2016 and 2017. And 2018 dia kata dia jual. 2018 dia jual pada harga 120,000 So the residual expenditure dia ialah 81,000. So dia untung residual expenditure dia 81,000 tapi dia jual pada harga 120,000. So dia dapat balancing charge of 39,000. Ini maksudnya ada restriction sebab tadi saya letak dekat dalam ni ada dia akan ada, kalau untuk balancing charge dia akan ada restriction. Balancing allowance no restriction. Loss kan, takkan nak restrict the loss sekarang you gain, bila you gain kita kena restrict lah, you tak boleh dah lah you dah claim capital allowance, you jual asset tu you dapat untung pula kan. So kita tak boleh, the untung tu kita kena restrict So if you look at this example, the computed balancing charge is 39,000 tapi kita kena compare balik the total allowance given. So you can go back to year 2015, the capital allowance given is 13,000. So here the residual expenditure is 31,000 and the selling price is 120,000. So dia dapat balancing charge kan 9,000. But kita kena kira total capital allowance yang dia dapat sebelum ni. So dia dapat 13,000 plus 3,000 plus 3,000 which is equivalent to 19,000. Okay. So you nampak tak sekarang ni dia dapat balancing charge 39,000, dia untung dia jual asset tu dia untung 39,000 tapi total capital allowance yang dia dah claim 19,000. So lebih kan, balancing charge is more than the capital allowance. So dia kena restrict lah. Dia can only claim up to 19,000 restricted. Boleh faham tak? Boleh faham kan? Because this balancing charge balancing charge is the gain. So gain tak boleh lebih dari the total capital allowance claim. So kita kata claim bila claim tadi bila kita tengok balik the income bila dia claim capital allowance maknanya income dia will be reduced. So dia dah tolak income dia dah banyak 19,000 dia tolak, sekarang dia nak tolak lagi 39, tak boleh lah. Dia kena restrict up to 19,000 sahaja. But if you look at example 20, right, example 20, this is for balancing allowance. No restriction Here, let's say the RE masih lagi macam atas, residual expenditure 81,000, selling price dia 70,000. So dia akan dapat balancing allowance of 11,000. So 11,000 ni not restricted walaupun tadi dia dah claim balancing allowance 19,000 tapi here balancing allowance dia 11,000, dia boleh terus ambil 11,000. So ada yang nak tanya nanti kan dekat mana nak nampak all these balancing allowance, balancing charges ni dekat sini. Awal-awal tadi saya tunjuk here. This is let's say adjusted income from business Kalau balancing charge kita tambah, capital allowance kita tolak, and balancing allowance pun kita tolak. You will have balancing charge and balancing allowance ni kalau you jual the asset Selagi asset tu tak ada asset yang kita jual, you will not have balancing charge or balancing allowance. Kita hanya ada adjusted income less capital allowance je. And kita akan dapat statutory income from business. If you started to sell or dispose the asset, then only you will have a balancing charge and also balancing allowance. Boleh? Nampak tak? The balancing charge kita tambah tau. Tambah that will increase your income. Tak boleh lah. Bila ditambah increase your income, nanti you akan kena tax yang lebih tinggi kan. Sedangkan you dah claim capital allowance at certain amount. So balancing charge kita ada restriction. So you can refer to example 19 and 20. Any question? Okey tak? Ke tengah termenung pergi tengok soalan? Ini baru plant and machinery belum tengok building lagi. Restrict dia berapa? Tak ada. Dia restriction tu macam yang ni restricted to the amount of balancing charge ni. The amount balancing charge. Restricted to the capital allowance claim. Katakanlah macam soalan ni, capital allowance claim 19. So kita restrict at 19. Katakanlah balancing charge dia 39. Capital allowance yang dia dah claim is 29. Then we use 29. Dia tak ada amount. Dia tak ada maximum. Dia cuma restrict. Dia bila masuk restricted ni maknanya balancing charge ni dia mesti less Free capital allowance claim. So the restriction ialah kepada capital allowance claim. Ada amount, tak ada maximum. Okay. Okay Aika faham Kalau balancing allowance no problem. Berapa banyak pun balancing allowance dia allow je. Balancing charge ni yang you kena careful. Sebab tu saya cakap jangan terbalik. Kalau you jual harga lebih rendah dari residual expenditure, itu ialah balancing allowance. Kalau you jual harga lebih tinggi dari residual expenditure, itu ialah balancing charge. Balancing charge yang ada restriction. Balancing allowance tak ada. So jangan terbalik kat sini. Nanti kan ini jadi charge, ini jadi allowance dah habis. Lain cerita dah. Okay. Alright, tak ada soalan I have scheduled a quiz for you afterwards dalam Google Classroom. I think by now dah ada, tak tahu kalau ada yang dah buka Google Classroom kan. So go to your Google Classroom, saya dah schedule a quiz, buat sekarang dan submit sebelum pukul 11. Ada due date dekat 11 ke 11:05 saya set. Kita habis kelas, you have to, dah ada, okay, cepat tengok. Alright, okay. Ke dah sedar dari tadi? I think dah sedar because you have the notification kan. But please convert your file to PDF. Senang saya nak marking. I am in the process of marking your your midterm exam. So those yang hantar PDF tu saya cepat sikit lah. Those yang bukan PDF saya kena convert dulu. And I mark and I will return the paper to you later. Tapi tak tahulah later tu bila. I need time sebabnya the exam is for subsection and you all total student yang saya ada is 109. So I have 109 times 4 lah yang saya nak kena maki. Alright. If you have no question, tak sabar nak jawab quiz ni kan. Still got time. You ada 1 jam lebih. Soalan tu pendek je. Ada soalan tak? Any question for me today? Why restriction for balancing charge? Yes, because dia ialah adjustment on the disposal value. Cannot exceed the total allowance given. Because the allowance is given to reduce your income. So you dah reduce your income at certain amount, you tak boleh reduce lagi. Itu je. That is why they restrict. The balancing allowance tu tak apa, itu consider loss. Loss tak apa, you loss you boleh tolak. But here you gain so tak boleh tolak semua. Kena restrict up to capital allowance je. Boleh. Word tak apa. Word okay. Dia yang saya kena convert tu kalau gambar buat word pun boleh. Any other questions tak? Kalau tak ada, I will end our session today and I give you time to complete the quiz and submit. And I'll see you next week lah for industrial building allowance. And maybe I will continue sikit lagi lah untuk yang higher purchase ni. Higher purchase ni example 8 ni kita tak tengok kan. Example 8 ni panjang. Alright, I know semua dah tak sabar nak jawab soalan quiz tu. So I give you time to answer. Alright, so if you have no question, I will end the session, today's session. So thank you. And I'll see you next week. And don't forget to answer the quiz. Alright, take care too. Okay, thank you. See you all next week. Okay, so I'll share the recordings later.